Welcome to Extending Healthspan, Living Better and Longer. This is the 5B lecture, the microbiome caring for the gut bacteria. So the different topics we're going to go through is the symbiotic relationship we have with these organisms throughout our gut and how they have epigenetic potential where they can change the genetic expression of diseases that may be on our DNA code, but may or may not be expressed. Along with that is the diversity of all these microbiomes within our gut. And the changing in the diversity makes changes in the physical effects that we show, we express, as well as psychological effects. And then finally, we're going to talk about probiotics and prebiotics and how to improve the microbiome for the better. So we are not alone. The human body contains 100 trillion microscopic life forms. Now, these are not just bacteria, these are multiple different types of life forms. And they live within a symbiotic relationship with the human body. So think of it as these cleaner fish that travel along next to sharks, or these whale sharks. So what is symbiosis? Is it coexistence, interdependence, or is it an antagonistic system? And it's an interdependence. So they receive something from us and we receive something from them. So symbiosis, another example, the crocodile and the Egyptian plover bird that picks out the tiny bits of food stuck in the teeth. So the crocodile's teeth get clean, free from infections, and the bird gets fed. So this is a mutual dependence with a positive outcome for all involved. So the gut microbiome has trillions of microscopic life forms. And all of this allows for this gene modulation. It's associated with mental disorders, where adipose tissue gets deposited and how much, with our emotions and also our behavior. Gene modulation, what that explains or that describes is how you can have a transcription factor. And these are proteins that can attach to the DNA and they can block the expression of a gene. So some examples in the lab are like the rabbit before transcription factor effect, the rabbit's white, and after the transcription factor, they are showing brown fur. So the microbiome has the same epigenetic effect. So it also modulates our gene expression. So we're going to start with mice studies and the expression of gender and gut microbiome. So I'm showing here a depiction of a mouse, a female with female characteristics, and a mouse with male characteristics. And the cartoon says, ignore him, he's just one of those conspiracy nuts. We're all a part of a giant evil experiment. Lots of mice experiments, things we cannot do using humans. So under natural conditions, there's a normal microbiome in the gut, in all mammals actually, not just humans. And they affect the growth hormone, affect expression of the genetics. And so we always think that chromosomes are the only thing that determine male or female characteristics. But these microbiome affect how those characteristics are expressed. They took mice and they delivered them under a cesarean section. And they kept it very sterile conditions where after birth, no microbiome got into the gut. And what they found was that the growth hormone was inhibited, and they developed sexual dimorphism, which means that they couldn't tell the difference male from female. So both looked the same, male and female, and it didn't matter what was on the chromosomes. Okay. So there's physical effects, and then there's also psychological effects based on the microbiome diversity. So there's many types of organisms, and different types affect whether you'll have health or disease. We've talked briefly in the past about a couple major types of gut bacteria. The Bacteroidetes, that's associated with decreased fat mass, increased metabolism, and a lower set point. So people and animals that tend to have more Bacteroidetes will have these characteristics. Firmicutes is a very efficient energy harvester that increases fat mass. So just to remind you, Firmicutes are yummy, but Firmicutes will make you round. That's how I remember Firmicutes as being the one that's not your microbiome of choice. Antibiotics indiscriminately kill bacteria, and they're only good for, bacterial infections that are serious, but they kill all kinds of gut microbiome. So you lose the diversity, and you can lose some of these great Bacteroidetes microbiome. One example of a disease that comes from, very common with losing the normal flora, is Pseudomembranous Colitis. And it's an overgrowth of Clostridium, usually occurs in patients that have been treated for a serious infection with antibiotics. And without this diversity of microbiome in the gut, this C. difficile, Clostridium difficile, will tend to overgrow and cause an inflammatory response in the lining of the colon. Those bacteria release toxins, and in response, the body starts to develop this mucus barrier to protect itself from the inflammation. Unfortunately, this membrane or pseudomembrane of mucus does not allow for absorption of water. So people get terrible watery diarrhea. They lose a lot of water, and they get severely dehydrated and, of course, malnourished. All right, so let's look at some more mice studies. Lean versus obese and fecal transplant. And by the way, one of the ways of treatment for the disease just presented, Pseudomembranous Colitis, is, of course, treating the bacteria, Clostridium difficile, but also including probiotics, and also, if there's a very serious situation, they will use fecal transplants. So my studies, they have done fecal transplants with lean people or obese individuals. So two groups of mice delivered by a sterile C-section, so they have no gut microbiome. So they're living in a bubble. So on the first group, the sterile mice receive a fecal transplant from a twin that's obese, a human twin. And these recipient mice receiving the exact same diet expressed adiposity, increase weight gain, adipose tissue deposition. If the mice from the same group that were born sterilely, received a transplant from a lean twin and with the same diet, they remained lean. So what they've concluded is that the gut microbiome can determine leanness or obesity. So their next research question, since the microbiome is responsible for all these physical changes, what type of bacteria is dominant in obesity? And I guess you can guess, since I've already talked about it. You have your choice of Bacteroidetes or Firmicutes. So to prove this, they took two groups of mice. They had the same intake, and they had a fecal transplant from either the lean mouse or the obese mouse. And they found that there was more Firmicutes in mice that had obesity. So human studies. So does the microbiome change with weight loss? So this is a study you can do that will pass the IRB. With human studies that have gone through weeks of weight loss, they start to get a increase in the Bacteroidetes after several weeks. Well, this is nearly a year of weight loss. And then the Bacteroidetes starts to increase and the Firmicutes starts to decrease. So how about stress? Does stress change the microbiome? All right, so the way to make a mouse stressed is to take away its mother very early on. And that develops a very anxious adult mouse. So then they took these anxious mice and transplanted their feces into germ-free mice. So what they found is mouse A that was caused to be anxious had a change in the microbiome, and their fecal transplant made mice that were sterile microbiome made them anxious as well. So what they've concluded is that chronic stress ends up changing your microbiome. So the research question is now, can you take anxious mice and make them not anxious by changing their microbiome? So this is treating the gut to treat anxiety. So these anxious mice were fed probiotics. And what they found is that these mice became less anxious mice. So the conclusion is that the brain and gut have this immense interaction. And some would go as far as to say that the gut is your second brain. Okay, so we're going to talk about treatment. Prebiotic versus probiotic. What is a prebiotic? The answer is it's food for the microbiome. So the way I remember that is pre as in feed, biotics that feed the good microbiome. And of course, prebiotics can also feed, types of prebiotics can feed Firmicutes, the one you don't want. Ultra processed foods, emulsifiers actually feed Firmicutes. Unfortunately, emulsifiers are in everything. Emulsifiers keep things like ketchup and mayonnaise and salad dressing, they keep it from separating. So emulsifiers keep it suspended in solution. Inulin is a chemical or a molecule contained in food that feed Bacteroidetes. And these are associated with leanness. Inulin containing foods are shown here. There's not a lot that I could find actually, but some of the inulin containing foods include bananas, garlic, asparagus. There's a list coming up for all of them. So the pathophysiology of Firmicutes. It's a very efficient energy absorber. It's inflammatory, and their endotoxin causes immunity disruption and insulin resistance. So you end up having a more sustained blood sugar levels. It's a hormone signaling disruptor, which means that it interferes with the chemicals or the hormones GLP-1, PYY that get released after you eat, so you have less satiety. And they stimulate fat storage. So to summarize some of this, biodiversity of microbiome, the symbiotic relationship we have, how these microbiome or how these gut bacteria, viruses can cause epigenetic changes. Prebiotics and of course probiotics are things that are giving the bacteria back. So the probiotics are the yogurt, kefir, kombucha, these kind of the actual bacteria, or you can get them in pill form. The results of the mice studies have shown that chronic stress changes gut microbes, causes obesity. Prebiotics, pre as in feed the bacteria. And the ones on top that are shown here, asparagus, garlic, banana, actually feed Bacteroidetes. Pro is promoting good bacteria. So things like yogurt, probiotic milk, kefir, sour cream. So my list of inulin containing foods: onions, garlic, bananas, asparagus. And the only one here that I had to learn about in depth was this chicory root. And that is in it's like a coffee wannabe beverage, instant beverage. Actually, and I found out that was what my grandfather always drank at night instead of coffee. So it's like a coffee wannabe. Found that in the health food store as well as Amazon. So that's the end of the presentation of the microbiome. Please ask questions, leave comments in the section. Thanks.